Lawrence Neal here, and welcome back to highintensitybusiness.com. This is the podcast where we show you how to build a thriving strength training studio business. This is episode 322, and the topic of today's episode is all around how do you explain high intensity training to clients? And I guess the broader theme of this really is how do we provide better information? How do we improve our messaging, our communication style to basically convert more clients to what we do, and ultimately grow our business more effectively. And to join me on this topic is Mike Petrella. Mike owns and operates STG Strength and Power, which is an award-winning premier private strength training and conditioning facility located in Ontario, Canada. I thought Mike was a great fit for this because I've had Mike on the podcast a bunch of times. I know Mike well, and he's so articulate and I think does a great job when it comes to communication. So Mike, I thought you'd be great for this, and welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me back on, Lawrence.
So let's just get straight into this, shall we? So, when I was talking to you about this in the build-up, you were saying, we don't talk about HIT. And that was maybe giggle and made a lot of sense to me. Do you want to just elaborate on that?
Yeah, I was worried it was going to be a very short podcast if we're talking about how to sell HIT, and I don't use the term. But what I mean by that is when people come in the door, let's just assume that we have a scale from 1 to 10 on how educated somebody is in terms of exercise science. So 10 being, your Dr. James Fisher, who's incredibly educated on the matter, has got a PhD on it, and 0 being someone who's never been to a gym and has never spoken about it. Most people are a 1 or a 2. They've maybe gotten advice from a friend at some point, but they just haven't really thought about it. So I don't really need to get into high-level exercise science with most people that come in the door. And the reason I don't get into the HIT or the acronym HIT is more because I just don't want them to go to Google and find these people who are infighting with each other all the time, or find the debates, or find the old threads, or even I got a friend on Instagram. I won't use any names, but he put a set out, and he was doing, I think it was like a leg curl. And he would be doing what I would consider really nice textbook 4-second positive, 4-second negative reps. And in that video, which gets like 150 views, there was one person who commented, "Why are the reps so fast?" And about 6 comments down, someone commenting, "Well, if you did the reps faster, you'd get better results." So, I mean, in maybe 150 views, not even 1,000 people watching it, 8 or 9 comments, you already have 2 people complaining about his rep count. So I don't want the average person even going to the internet and looking at this. I want them to focus on coming into our facility, and then we tell them about strength training. We tell them about our belief that if you get stronger on a week-to-week basis, and how we're going to get that for the client is going to be a really good boom for their health, for their fitness. And we want to keep them away from the fitness industry in general, just because at least we believe there's so many perils and so many places for people to fall down and, just get into the trap of buying hundreds of dollars worth of supplements, or doing more exercise than they need to, or not intense exercise. And we almost try to shield them from that. Now, as they progress, I have lots of clients, they'll get off a machine, and they'll say, "Hey, this machine, it just feels great. I've been on other ones before, and this one feels great." Well, maybe that's my cue. It's like, "Oh, well, the guy who designed most of these, most time being Arthur Jones, saying, he was really intelligent. And at one point he had this empire that he had the biggest exercise company, the biggest private airport, the biggest private zoo, all simultaneously." Oh, wow, that's cool. And maybe they ask a follow-up question, maybe they don't. And you just kind of put the little tidbits in there, where if they want to follow up and they want to learn more, I'm certainly happy to do it. And we certainly have the knowledge to do it. But I don't really push high-level exercise science. And I certainly don't push even the idea of high-intensity training, because even as far as high-intensity training goes, if you were to do a Google search, you'd probably wind up with high-intensity interval training as the dominant thing that you're searching for, which, as most of your listeners will know, Lawrence, it's a very different methodology in terms of its application than what most of your people are doing.
Yeah, like HIT, Arthur Jones HIT, maybe page 7 if you're lucky on Google, right? Maybe more like page 15. It's yeah. I love so many things you said there. And just to reinforce, I love that you're not kind of, you're waiting for the client to pull the thread on some of these things, as opposed to coming to them and saying, oh, you should love these machines. They were designed by Arthur Jones, and all the history about that, which is most likely to bore a lot of your clients. So you're waiting for signals, right, to drip a little bit of information in. And I guess you've also got to be mindful of the time restraint, right? They're in for, is it 30-minute sessions you typically do, right?
Yes, once they get going. The first couple sessions, we tell people to have a little bit more time in their schedule, because obviously myself or one of the other trainers, they're going to be getting on every exercise first. They're going to be demonstrating it. There's going to be some exercise we find that are great for them, some of them that won't work for them. Everyone's a little bit different. So normally the first session's close to an hour. The second one's probably about 45 minutes. And by the third session, the majority of people can train in half an hour or less. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then that continues from there.
Okay, got it. So just talk to me a little bit more about your thoughts on this as it relates to talking about high intensity training. I mean, you say strength training, I noticed there. So is that what you typically refer to, what you do? Because I know some people might say resistance training or resistance exercise or evidence-based resistance training. I think most of us know to move away from saying high intensity training due to the ambiguity which you highlighted. So is that what you would center on, strength training, just using, you think that's pretty accurate?
So when someone's coming in the first time, and I guess they would have very little idea of what we do. Maybe they had a friend that said, hey, I like training here, but they don't know a lot about us. What we tend to get them to focus on is the numbers. So if I try to tell people that if you could do a given exercise for 100 pounds for 10 repetitions, then our goal would be maybe 101 pounds for 10 repetitions the next time. And I explained to them how if you put enough intensity into the workout, if you give the body a reason to adapt, and then you give them enough time to overcompensate, that over a period of time, they're going to become a better version of themselves. And I try to keep it very, very simple. And I try to get people to focus on the numbers, because at least it's something that's concrete. Now, obviously, you can change seat settings, give people more leverage. You can get people to have their form fall apart. I mean, you could always find loopholes around any system. But I think kept under the eyeful watch of a good trainer, we can get people to progress in a very meaningful manner. And as long as we focus on the math, we focus on the numbers, it's hard to dispute that if you're lifting 50% more after maybe 6 months, maybe it takes a year or whatever it is for the person, that they're going to be a better, stronger version of themselves. And then when it comes to how much they have to do, focusing on the safety and speed of movement, these are all things that we just kind of build in, but we don't necessarily use it as the selling point at first, or really try to drive it into everybody. I mean, from the very first session, the very first exercise they do, we'll explain how we're probably moving them a little bit slower in terms of their cadence than maybe what they're used to, or maybe what they've seen online. And these are all things that we build in, but we really focus on the numbers, because we believe that if we train people the appropriate way and we make sure that they're not overdoing something else in their lifestyle, it's something that we can really control. And not to get too off topic, but a lot of people in our industry, they really focus on the weight loss. And we try to get away from that as much as we can, for no other reason that we don't feel that we can control enough of the factors around it. We're just not with people enough of the time to control what they're eating. We've even had people that after 6-7 months of training, they've gotten quite a bit stronger. It's very clear they've put on muscle. And after that amount of training, they basically come to us and say, I'm just not going to lose weight, because on weekends, I'm not going to give up my drinking. I'm not going to give up my food. And to them, it's just more important than the weight loss. And that's fine. That's their personal decision. I don't think it's ideal, certainly not ideal for health. But we can't control those factors. So we do have a nutritionist on staff that we get her to handle that stuff if someone's coming to us and that's what they're specifically looking for. But as a trainer, we really focus on the numbers of strength training as our main thing that's driving retention and our main reason for existing in terms of getting people hopefully better health.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's so interesting. Yeah, it's, I mean, what I tend to do when people talk about fat loss is I will talk about, and I'll just take a lot of, ideas from books like Body by Science and describe how strength training is going to assist in fat loss and the mechanisms behind that. But I try and keep it, I'm guilty of going too complex and trying to be too scientific with my communication, and sometimes I really need to get better at dumbing it down. I think it's probably because I'm trying to overcompensate for not really knowing what I'm talking about sometimes. But I'll be very clear that that it really the biggest lever to pull is diet, and I'd say I personally believe that I think it's important that most of us do focus on the strength training as our primary strategic niche in our business, and then defer to other experts or other businesses for the nutrition component, mostly from a branding perspective. Because I think if we end up doing too many things, we can dilute our focus and what we're kind of known for. And again, this is something that obviously Luke has talked about extensively on the podcast. And for that reason, I'm actually in the process of trying to build a relationship or a partnership with a nutrition service provider who, listeners of the podcast can actually defer to for nutritional help if they don't have someone on staff, and if they've decided to be, if that's if they want to just focus on the strength training purely, right? So I think that could be, because I think there's an important part to be like, well, okay, nutrition is the primary lever for what you want, and I'm going to defer to that person as opposed to, like, because I'm sort of listening to what you're saying. It's like if you didn't have a nutritionist on staff and a trainer just tries to give tidbits of advice like control your calorie intake or eat in this way or what have you, it's just not going to work, because they need like a dedicated individual who's going to like help them with the planning and the meal plans and the habits and all the rest of it, right? And I just find it, even if a trainer starts giving advice, it's from my own experience, it's like it doesn't really work, right? Because they're not going to stick with it.
Yeah, I shouldn't say that I've never given diet advice to anybody. I have, and there are certainly people that have done very well with it. We just find that we can control enough of the factors to almost guarantee success in the strength training realm. Whereas, like, I actually know other trainers in this area who they might do things completely different than what we do at STG. And, they're texting their clients at 6 a.m. every morning and making sure that they're eating the breakfast that was prescribed to them. And that's their business model. It's completely different from what we do. And that's fine. And I know some people in this area that do a really great job of what I would call fitness coaching. So they're getting people ready for the stage, and they do the posing and they do the diet plans to get them really ripped up. And same idea, they are constantly on their phones messaging their clients on a day-to-day basis. They need that interaction. And that's just a whole separate business plan as well. And it's great. I got nothing against people doing it differently than what we do. It's just not what we tend to focus on. And to kind of bring this full circle, we were talking about why I don't use the term HIT. For probably the last 3 or 4 years, maybe longer than that, I was using the term evidence-based because I liked that term. And I've even moved away from evidence-based now, because whatever you want to believe, I can show you the evidence to suggest it. So you want to talk about diet, I can show you the vegan evidence that make you want to be a vegan tomorrow. I can show you the carnivore evidence to make you want to be a carnivore tomorrow, which they're obviously at opposite ends of the spectrum. If you want to go to the most abbreviated training, I can show you towards, the Mike Mentzer stuff in the 90s there. There's hypertrophy doctors on social media. They have PhDs in exercise science, and they're talking about at least 20 sets per body part, and they show the evidence to suggest that. I think with some of the stuff you've had on here with James, there's some evidence to suggest 9 overall sets over the course of a week. So I can, whatever you want to believe, I can show you something to give you your bias, or I can show you something to challenge what you believe. At the end of the day, I think the body is a very intuitive, adaptive organism, and you can make a lot of things work. So even the terms evidence-based, I find just to be too broad for what we want to do. So I don't use the term the STG way or anything of that nature. These people come in and I just say, we're going to do strength training. We're going to do it in a way that we believe to be effective, and we let the numbers dictate how fast they will gain strength or won't gain strength, and we just focus on every client being individual. And I love to have some sort of blanket term that maybe said what we did and maybe tied me into a lot more of my colleagues. I think a lot of us are closer. I've said it many times, are closer together than we are apart. But I have a hard time putting any sort of label on it right now, because there's just so many ways around it. The evidence is so broad. The research is so broad. The takes on it are so broad. I was listening to Doug Brignoli talk on biomechanics, and I've become a big fan of his. I was so impressed by some of his work. I reached out to him just to start talking to him, and he's been very nice to me. And I bought his book, and some of the stuff that he brings up in biomechanics, other, I'll say, well-known bodybuilders have gone out and they've tried to dispute it, and they dispute it mostly through their emotions, they how they feel about it. And he comes back very Jordan Peterson-ish, and uses math and uses logic, and it doesn't really get hot under the collar, and is very very professional. And you look at what he says and say, hey, this is physics. It's very hard to debate, but there's a lot of people that would be against what he has to say. There's a lot of people listen to what he has to say too, which I think is good. But he went onto a powerlifting podcast recently and told them why they should probably never barbell squat again. And to the credit of the gentlemen that were hosting the podcast, they let him speak his piece. They challenged him, but they asked good questions, and they let him talk. But can you imagine talking to a world-class powerlifter and saying that unless you want to compete as a powerlifter, you shouldn't barbell squat? Here is the reason why. And a very articulate argument why. I found it fascinating, but he's going to make as many enemies as he makes friends. And he's realistically just trying to help, and he's just trying to give his viewpoint. And it's great. And that's just the industry that we work in.
Yeah, and that's what happens when you put yourself out in public and you produce work, right? You're going to get criticism because that's part of it. And it's healthy, and it's good to be challenged because it makes your ideas stronger, right? Or it makes it helps you develop ideas. No, I've like what I've heard from Doug. I haven't actually dived into his work deeply yet. And you obviously sent me a podcast. I need to listen to that. And in fact, I want to watch it because I know he does a lot of he talks about math and physics as it pertains to biomechanics, and he does it with his hands and all this kind of thing. So it's one of those where I'll probably have to watch it. But yeah, so I'm interested in going deeper on his stuff. There's a few things I just want to touch on, which you said. Love what you said about evidence-based. You're right. I hadn't really thought about it in the way you said it, in terms of it is actually, again, quite ambiguous, right? We're trying to be more precise in our language, but obviously not all evidence is equal, but evidence-based just suggests that there's any evidence, right, to support anything people want to do. And so, removing that might actually be a beneficial thing to do, which is obviously what you've noticed. I just want to go back to the core theme of this podcast in terms of how to explain HIB. And I know you've probably touched on this in our introductory workout podcast we did together, which I'll link to in the show notes of this, because then people can go even deeper on your exact sort of initial consultation process. But just for completeness, I'd love to just, not to put you on the spot, Mike, but let's say I'm a new prospect and I'm coming in and I'm like, what do you guys do? How do you respond to that? What's your first thoughts? Yeah.
So if you were to just say, what do you do? I would look you in the eye and I say, we focus on strength training here. We feel that by pushing the muscles in hopefully a very safe, very biomechanically friendly way, but a very intense way, that we can create a positive adaptive change in the body. And we then normally have them go through the gym. I mean, everyone has a different process. One of the things that we use, as you know, Lawrence, we have a fairly large, fairly well-equipped facility. So we use the facility itself as a selling point. And I find that when I start talking about strength, inevitably, most people will say, okay, well, my shoulder is weak, my elbow is weak, my ankle is weak, I've had an injury. They tell us some spot in their body where they would like to have more strength. And then I will then walk them over to whatever device we have, which I think is the best or most unique thing that we have, that would be relevant to them specifically. So, I had someone come in recently. They've been training with us for a bit now, and he had a couple of ankle surgeries. So I have a very specific piece of equipment for training the ankles, which our friends over at Dynavex make, called the Plantaris. So I will put this client on the Plantaris because I know they've never felt anything like it. Now, if someone comes in with a weak ankle and I want to strength train, that's great. Eventually, I want their whole body to be strong. And I tell them that that is the long-term solution to just about everything. Every part of your body needs to be strong. But I'll focus specifically on what they have. A lot of people have lower back problems, and I've discussed with you on the podcast in the past that they say they have lower back pain. I walk them over to the MedX lumbar. I know you got one at your studio as well. And, they don't know what it is. They've never seen one before. But I will then go into explaining what they're looking at. I'll explain the restraints, and I'll explain how I can use this to safely strengthen their lower back. Sometimes I put them on it. Sometimes I don't. I'm kind of reading the person as we go into it. But I try to make it a very specific to them. The overall process is general, that myself and their trainers kind of know what to do and what to say. But then we're listening to what they're telling us, and then we can distill it down. So everyone that comes in, I might show them an exercise machine that is, good, but it's going to be relevant to what they have specifically told me to do. But right off the hop, I'm really focusing on, we try to make you stronger. We focus on strength training. That is our main thing. We feel that maximum benefit in terms of how you look, overall health, metabolic health, anything you want to put. We really, truly do feel that a lot of it comes from strength. And again, not to get too off topic, but I actually just got a thing sent to me from Jeff at Dynavex, and they were looking at knees under MRIs, and I think it was about just under 300 patients. Now, the interesting thing that they looked at is they had all these patients that essentially had pain-free knees, but under an MRI had some sort of issue that was shown. So they wouldn't be considered perfectly healthy knees, but all of these people were pain-free. So it's like, well, if you're pain-free, you probably have pretty good quality of life. And one of the things that they were finding with all these people, that, yeah, they had an issue, but they were good. Otherwise, they were strong. And they had like a benchmark, I believe, for strength. So it's like, okay, well, maybe I can't completely fix every little microscopic part of your knee, but if it's stronger, there's probably a good possibility you're going to have better function and better quality of life. And these are the things that I don't get right down to the nitty gritty of all the anatomy of the knee. But I really, again, not to say this too much, I lean on strength. I lean on that if you are a stronger version of yourself in many different facets of your life, you're probably going to be a better version of yourself.
Yeah. More strength equals less pain, right?
Yes.
Generally.
Yeah. And then even to make it kind of relevant for today's time, obviously, depending on what country you're in, COVID is still a big thing. At least it is in Canada. I think there's enough evidence to suggest that a lot of these high-level athletes, whether it be your Division I players in the States or your professional players, anyone that would have a big enough social media following that you hear when they speak, a lot of them got COVID at one point or other because they were constantly being tested by their governing organization. And, without fail, the vast majority of them, it came back, luckily, I'm asymptomatic. And I think this was a nice way of saying, hey, look, these very strong, very conditioned athletes who are taking care of themselves, yeah, they're as susceptible as anybody else to contracting it, but their ability to fight against it and their ability to ultimately be healthy in the face of something that is highly transmissible should be further proof that we need to be striving towards this strength and this health. And, to become a professional athlete requires a certain level of skill and genetics that not everyone has. But I think everyone has the ability to become a much stronger version of themselves. And it should show them that, this is going to make you more resistant to more resistant to injury, more resistance to different viruses, more resistance to what's the word I'm looking for here? Like all-cause mortality. We've seen those studies where the stronger you are, you're probably going to live longer. And I think these are the things that we can almost universally focus on.
Let's dig into some of those, because I know that there are some people that listen to this show that do struggle to articulate answers to certain questions they get as well as they'd like to. So what happens when you get the cardio question, right? So you get someone come in, they're not really that bothered about body recomposition. They're more interested in cardiovascular fitness. They say, I just want to be fitter. How do you respond to that?
Right. We just explain it as it is. And what I mean by that is they'll come in, and I normally say to them, they ask about cardio. Normally you're asking me because you're asking me one of two questions. And the first being using it for weight loss, which we won't get into because kind of took it off the table, which is fine. And the other one is for the ability to have greater heart and lung output. So I explained to them that exercise is just, from Jim Flanagan, I use all the time, is movement against resistance. So the quality of the resistance, or the quality of the resistance dictates the quality of the exercise. So I say, if you take any sort of steady state cardio machine, I normally use the bike, the treadmill, and the elliptical as the main three. There's probably others out there that you could use. I say, ultimately, you are using your muscles through a limited range of motion, normally at a fairly fast pace. And you have to do it for a considerable period of time to create the debt, to create the adaptation, to create the stress on the body to get what you need. And I basically show them that, if we train the muscles through a greater range of motion with a greater resistance through a slower cadence, I can create a much higher oxygen debt a lot faster. But you're also going to get the benefit of stronger muscles, stronger tendons, stronger ligaments. And I explained to them how I can give them all of the cardiovascular benefit while also giving them what I believe to be the muscular hypertrophy benefit. And I explained to them how essentially the tool that they're wanting to use to create this cardiovascular improvement is an inefficient tool. And then I also, again, use the gym. I said, look, I got all this equipment here. If I thought the treadmill was of high value to you, I would have one here. I have equipment here that's worth 10 times more than a row of treadmills. I said, if it was great, I would have it here. And it just isn't. And I basically explained, in my opinion, the inadequacies of the tools that they're looking to use. And then if somebody really wants to push me on the subject, I will get them to do an old-fashioned Dr. Darden metabolic workout, where I will get them to do normally 3 rounds of either a squat, leg press, or deadlift, some form of dip or chest press, and then some form of pull down or chin up. And I'll get them, it's 9 overall sets. So, you do 3, then 3, then 3. I do it without break. And most people wouldn't be able to do it in half an hour. And I push them to get it done in under 15 minutes. And like they are, by even the second or third set, they're dragging their butt to get over there. And I just say, hey, you wanted this. You wanted to see if you could improve your cardiovascular health through doing this. And by the time they are done, it's so hard. And I say, now this level of conditioning is not really needed for most people. I find that what we do at STG, which is about a minute in between sets, average out about 10 sets, 10, 11 sets, that is enough conditioning for them to do almost anything they want to do in their day-to-day life and have an easy time doing it. But I take it to the more extreme end to let them know that, look, if cardiovascular health is your main thing, I can either explain it to them logically, or if they want to feel it, we can make them feel it, and we can go through that routine. And by the time they get to that, assuming they even get there, because some people don't, they get to that third set of squat, leg press, or deadlift. I mean, they're on set 7. They're 10 minutes, 11 minutes into the exercise, and they're just huffing and puffing for air. And they get the point relatively quick. And generally, they don't ask to go through that again.
Yeah, no, that sounds like a nightmare. Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Like to your point, like you can explain it to your blue in the face. If someone's really challenging, the idea, then they have to experience it. And you can do the approach you just described, or you can just literally use like a big free, right? Because a pull down leg press is pretty much that's gonna use almost every single muscle group, especially the pull down for the upper body over the chest press, right? And especially if you want that kind of metabolic effect. And I think if you just had someone do like a big free with rush factor, they're going to get that. However, I'm just curious, have you ever, because I know that, I don't know how true this is, and I've not really looked into the studies around this, but I often hear anecdotes about how women, and I've seen this as well, I've seen this with clients, how women sometimes, and maybe there's some men too, don't, they might go for a workout and they're not gasping for air at the end of it, and they might even be like, is that it? Is the workout you just described, that sounds like that would destroy anyone regardless of their genetic predisposition, male or female. So maybe that's just to be sure, like to do the free sets. But have you had that where you've had a woman who is like, interested in cardiovascular fitness, who doesn't seem to get totally gassed after like some of these big sets and still challenging it? Have you ever experienced that?
I mean, everyone's different.
Yeah.
It's kind of on a case by case basis. I don't think there's too many people, regardless of what their conditioning is, that are going to be able to do what I described without having their heart and lungs come up to a fairly substantial amount. I'll give you a kind of an example of something like that. I trained this woman back several years ago, and I won't say she was upset, but she was worried that she wasn't working hard enough because she wasn't sweating during her workout. She felt to have a hard workout, she was going to have to sweat more. Now, like most of the people in our field, we keep our gyms relatively cool. I mean, several people that we know, they work with the business community, financial people, and they got fans on all their machines, and they make it so they don't even have to really change out of their professional attire. And we know that all sweating is you're just, getting hotter and the body's trying to cool itself down. But if the body is cool, the air is cool, the body will cool down just fine. So that was her hang up. So the next time she came in the next week, I did the exact same workout, exact same exercise sequence, probably a little bit more weight. I'm assuming she was progressing. But I raised the temperature 10 degrees in the gym before she got in there. Well, guess what? At the end of that workout, which was identical, she was sweating everywhere. And I just told her, I just turned the temperature up. Like, there's no difference. And that was just what made it click for her.
Did her performance suffer?
Pardon?
Did her performance suffer?
Well, she felt it was harder because the air is not as dense. But that's just what made it click for her. Some people, and I don't know if you've ever done any of the martial arts, Lawrence, but that's what's really great about the martial arts world. You have a technique and you say, okay, this is how it is. And someone says, well, I don't think this will work. Well, come over here and I'll show you. And pain is a fantastic way of getting a point across to somebody. Now, we don't have to go that extreme in the fitness world, but it's like, okay, well, you don't want to sweat. Okay, I know the factors what makes the body sweat. I know better than you do. I'm just going to turn the heat up. It's like, oh, okay, well, I want to have my heart and lungs moving are working a lot harder. I don't feel that this is taxing enough. Do I need additional cardio? No. We're just going to take some time out of the in between sets. We're going to use the rush factor, and you let them feel it. And there's some people that you can explain it to them and they're going to get it. And that's great. And there's some people that are going to need to feel it. And for those people, that's just what you do.
Yeah, this is great because it's bringing it back to a central theme of, yes, we're talking about how do you explain high intensity training to clients, but it's knowing when to explain versus when to just get them to experience something, right? And when to program something specifically so you can answer their question through example. Yeah.
Yes. And I know a lot of the people on here that listen, one of the things that they do a lot of is the free introductory workout. And the idea is you want them to feel the difference. You want them to feel that muscular burn, that muscular tension. And normally that goes hand in hand with a lot of the people that listen to this having really great equipment and having really great exercise instruction. And you're banking on the fact they've probably never experienced anything like that. And that's what you're selling them, which is a perfectly logical way to get people in the door and hopefully keep them as clients.
Yeah, exactly. Well said. So what about when you get people in, and again, you have to forgive me because I know you probably touched on this during the podcast about the initial consultation, which we did over a year ago, probably. But you're always, you're asking questions around goals, needs, motivation, injury history, all of that. And are you always then tailoring what you say back that relates to that, as opposed to talking about benefits that they've not even mentioned they care about? Or are there still some benefits that you'll always talk about? Because obviously this is the thing, right? Strength training is so all encompassing. There's so many incredible benefits. I mean, it's pretty much ticking every box that it can be so, tempting to give them the entire laundry list, but then people's eyes glaze over. So tell me a little bit more about how you talk about the benefits of HIB.
So we have, I guess you could say, a general construct or a general template of what we would ideally like to say to people. But then within that, there should be room for individuality in people. Again, someone says they got like I said earlier, a hurt back or a hurt ankle. It's going to change where I might take them into the gym. But where I actually want to go with the answer here, Lawrence, is I was fortunate enough that my dad owned a car dealership, and this was before the internet age. So now people, when they come in, they've already done all their research. So back then, it was really the job of the salesman to sell the car. Now people pretty much already know what they want. And he had to let go of several salesmen over the year because they actually talked themselves out of the sale. The person was there. They had their checkbook. They were going to buy that car, and they went too much. So I tried to have this whole thing done in 10 minutes or less, because realistically, I think most people already know whether they're going to train with you or not. So I do not try to give them too much information. Now, if someone's sitting there and they got good question after good question, which happens to, I'm more than happy to get into it as detailed as they want. But I'll give you a good example. When I think Luke still does where he sends his trainers out to other gyms for like an internship. It might be tougher with the travel restrictions right now, but he sent one of his trainers up to our place for a week, and they got to learn a bit about us, and we got to learn about them, which was a lot of fun. And I had this consultation booked, and I was going to let her see how I deal with this. And just by chance, I actually booked the consultation during somebody's session, and I messed up the booking. And the person came in. I knew instantly that I had done this, so I sold the person in between sets.
No.
So they came in the door. I gave the person I was training an extra 2-minute break instead of 1 minute, and I sold the person in 2 minutes, and they still trained with me today.
Wow!
So I didn't have the time, and it just worked out that it was one of these people that really didn't need to have all the answers right then and there. They just wanted to know what we did. And I didn't even say that I was in the middle of a session. I just greeted them at the door. And I said, we focus on strength training. This is the equipment. And they had one question. I answered it. And I said, would you like to start next week? And they said, yeah, I would. I said, great. And I said, you send me a text message and I'll get it. And I sold them in between sets. And now that's not going to work for every single person. It's not a method that I would say that people need to start doing to save time. But a lot of times when they're walking in the door, they're already mostly there. And you just need to get out of your own way, answer some questions that they have in an intelligent manner, show them that you know what you're talking about. And most of the people that are listening to your podcast, I consider to be some of the most intelligent people in the industry. And just let them come in and train. They want to come in and train. They've already walked in the door. They've already done the hardest part. I've had all kinds of people over the years that have said they've driven by and they've seen the sign for 3, 4, 5 years. And for whatever reason, today was the day they finally decided to walk in. They've already made they've jumped the biggest hurdle. They've already taken care of the hardest step for you. Just sign them up. Just say, when would you like to start? They don't know about strength training. That's why they're coming to you. You're the expert. Let them just come in.
Yeah, that's so profound because, as you know, like before doing the studio and doing high intensity business, I was in sales for almost 10 years, and I still make that mistake of talking myself out of things or spending too much time on that. probably. So that was a really good reminder, actually. I thought you were going to say you just palm them off to the Discover Strength trainer.
That's what I should have done.
You could have done that. I mean,
Yeah,
they'd probably be very good. Even though I know that at DS they have a strict, team that do the introductory workouts, and because I know that it's not an expectation for all trainers to be selling the workout, but they'd still be pretty good at it. I mean, look, the people they get are very high caliber, so it wouldn't surprise me. But no, that's really interesting to hear you say that. But you also got to remember is that you have such good charm, right, which helps with the selling.
I wouldn't say that I have charm, but the other thing
I'm half joking. You are a charming guy, but I'm half joking.
Well, thank you. Yeah. I would say that a lot of this just comes with experience too. Like, in the early days, I certainly didn't have a process, and I was probably winging it a little bit more than I am now. And, I look back sometimes, I bought my first machine, I think in 2006 when I started training people. In a blink of an eye, that's going to be 20 years. And I can remember going to get that first machine and even getting stopped at the border and getting put into this back room with a bunch of cops because I didn't have my paperwork the right way. And that feels like yesterday. And, even like I can remember when guys like myself and Blair were coming in, we were the young guys. And now it's kind of like, well, I don't think we're the young guys anymore. I don't know at what point that changes. But now I'm seeing guys that, 20, 21, 22, and they're doing the same thing, and they're setting up very cool garage gyms, and they're getting people to train in their methodology. And I just love seeing them come up. And I think a lot of it is just, you become very confident in what you've done because, you have people that you've trained to be very strong or very fit, or you've helped people overcome certain issues, whether it be different diseases or whether it be orthopedic concerns. And you just have that wealth of experience to draw from. And I think it just becomes a part of you more than anything. And I don't know if there's a way to replicate that outside just time and doing it. But for the people that are new to this or getting into this, find your own rhythm and it will just happen. And there'll be road bumps. We've all had them. But I think it just kind of comes with time and just doing it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Practice. That's so true. Like you just got to get out and start trying to explain things in the best way you can, and then look at the feedback you get from people and adjust accordingly. Like I had a client the other day, and I'm trying to build this system around teaching focus, right? So every week there's a weekly teaching focus, and trying to make it really succinct. And the whole purpose of it is trying to ingrain the why behind the workout and basically improve retention, right? So people keep coming. Because I've heard so many stories of, people going to studios doing high intensity strength training for a set amount of time, and they leave and do like CrossFit or something. And it's like, there's so much cognitive dissonance when I hear that. Because how could they do that? So I think sometimes we need to do a better job of, even though the workout does speak for itself, a large part, we still have to, I believe, do a fair bit about the education of various aspects of health and fitness, which strength training addresses. And I had this client sat in the leg press, and I did my teaching focus on cardio. Right. And it was way too long. Firstly, it's not going to be sustainable because it was too long and the sessions are 30 minutes and if clients are back to back, it's just not viable. And you could see he was glazing over because I went so hardcore on the science, at least for me. And at the end, he looked at me and he said, "Lawrence, I'm already here. I don't need you to sell me." And it was good because it was like, wow, was I coming across really salesy? Okay, that's a good point. And that's that, that was a little bit uncomfortable. I was a little bit, I wouldn't say upset. I laughed, but a little bit, it hurt me a little bit. But I think that's really important that we just try stuff. I'm just trying to reinforce your point because that feedback made me then completely rewrite how we communicate the cardio message to make it way more simple, far more succinct, and that's going to be a lot more effective. But obviously, like you say, there's lots of bumps along the way.
Again, I can't stress enough that it's good to have a system. I do have one, and I do believe in it. But then realizing the individualness of the person, and just to give you an example, I have clients that they do not know or do not care about anything that has to do with the workout. They just come in, they do it. They know on some level that training harder and being stronger is better. But that's the extent of it. And that's all they want to know. And that's fine. I have no issues with that. But then on the other end of the spectrum, like when I did that Colorado experiment and the Mike that wasn't able to come on the podcast with you because he was working, he's a client of mine. That's how I originally got to know him. He has gotten for someone who has no invested interest in the fitness industry, he's not a trainer, he doesn't own a gym, he has like no interest in STG outside of being a client. He has learned more about Nautilus machines and Arthur Jones and bodybuilding and the fitness industry in general. We'll talk on Instagram pretty much on a daily basis about something fitness related. I mean, my obsession with exercise machines. He knows a lot about it. He actually just bought a Nautilus multi-exercise from some lady close to him because she had it billed wrong on Facebook Marketplace and she sold it for like $200. And he's doing negative chins and negative dips in his own garage for his secondary workout. And he would be on the opposite end of the spectrum where he's constantly asking me very intelligent questions. And it's a lot of fun because I don't get a lot of that with people of that kind of interest who, like, again, know or care who Arthur Jones is. And, he'll tag me on stuff on social media that I otherwise wouldn't see, that I want to absorb that content. And, I've been telling him about the biomechanics reading I'm doing at Doug's stuff. And he's asking me questions about that. And he's someone that I could even experiment with some of the exercises with. And he's on one end of the spectrum. And again, the other end is, I don't know. I don't care. I don't want to know. I'm coming to see you. You're the expert. You do what you tell me to do. And then I'm leaving. And both are great. They both have their reasons for being there. But I also have both under the same facility. So you have to be able to cater to both.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a really good point. And I think that I understand what you're saying. I think that obviously there are people that really don't care. But I would be concerned that you potentially could lose them if you assume that when they might be, I don't know, they might come across a different fitness concept, and because they don't know better, they choose that instead. So I think that's why a teaching focus is handy. But I'm talking literally like 20 or 30 to 30 seconds. It's something like a weekly teaching focus for this week is just to explain, this is why we go to momentary muscular failure. And it's just, bam, 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 done, straight on with the session. And then obviously you've got people who want to go deep. And it's funny because then you've got the problem of, well, if we're limited with time, then we're going to have to park this and talk about it next session or have a coffee out of hours or whatever it is, So that's, and I'd also mention as well, I thought this was a really good analogy. Luke used to say, and this is to your point around systems and being too rigid, right? He said, I might butcher this a little bit, but he said something like, we give you the music, as in we give the trainers the music, but they have to play it. And it's just like saying, we're going to give you our way and way we want to educate and train, but then you have to do it in your own authentic way. And I think that is really important. And I think that resonates very much with what you said about people expressing their own way on things. So just
what I really like
go
about
ahead.
That, I just want to jump on that for a second.
Yeah.
What I really like about that, assuming that you got that quote, fairly close, authentic. I think that's one of the main things that people need to focus on. They need to be authentic to what they believe. Now, I don't do super slow at my gym. I should say I would do it more as something that would be like to change things up, something they haven't seen in a while. But I have friends that is their bread and butter. That is like 99% of their sets. That's what they do. And if that's what they truly believe is the best methodology, and that's how they train, and that's what is authentic to them, then I think that's what they should do. Now, I'm not here to debate whether fast reps or slow reps are the best way of doing anything. But if that's what you believe and that's what you feel, it's going to resonate with people. So for me personally, strength training, getting stronger, is what resonates with me. I mean, I could show you evidence-based where the load is not particularly important to hypertrophy. And you can get hypertrophy with volume. You can get hypertrophy with really high repetition sets. And I don't have any issue with that. That just isn't what I feel to be the best way or the most ideal way of doing things. So it's not authentic to me. So if I'm trying to sell something that I don't believe in personally, that I'm not doing myself, people are smart. I mean, you can lie to people to a certain spot, but most people know when you're not being genuine to them. So, if I bring someone in and it's like, hey, this is how I train. This is how my trainers train. This is how I've been training people for years. And it's not to say we can't ever learn and adapt to become something new, but this is what we believe. This is what's authentic to us. I think that's going to go a long way with people. And same idea, whereas, you had Spike on the podcast. He's kind of my right-hand man. If you were to watch both of us, get two cameras and watch both of us, I guess you could say, sell a new client, there's certainly going to be overlap there. There's going to be things that we both believe in. There's going to be things that I guess you could say are part of the system that we use. But yeah, it's going to look different. There are going to be differences between us because we both see things differently. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I really like that idea that, yeah, he's got to play the music his way. So I have no issues with that. I think it's a really good way of looking at things.
Yeah. That was really helpful. Mike, I'm just aware of time, so I just thought I'd ask one more question. I'm just really curious, again, bring it back to central theme, although we have been talking about this theme throughout the podcast in terms of educating and communicating high intensity training to clients. It's this theme around education and teaching. Once someone joins STG, you mentioned you might have systems there in terms of education. Maybe you're drip feeding them every time they come in. Do you have like a system or approaches in place where you just make sure that over time someone is going to start to understand more and more about the benefits of what they're doing? Obviously, the exception being those that really couldn't care less, perhaps, and just want to get in and out, and that's it. But you have, and then further on that, I'd love you to expand on, like, if you could again, like, actually role play some actual examples, like how you might educate someone on flexibility or the whether stretching is required, warming up, things like that.
Okay. So probably the best teacher that I ever had, which was in a subject completely different than fitness, what his, I guess, method for teaching people was he was constantly planting seeds. He had a level of knowledge in his particular field that was much greater than pretty much anybody around him. So, he wasn't going to expect anyone to be able to converse with him at the highest level possible. Just like in the fitness industry, I don't expect most of my clients to come in and discuss biomechanics or exercise physiology with me, because that's what I do all day long. That's what I should be at least somewhat good at. So he was always planting these seeds. So it's not really a system, but it's like, okay, somebody has a really good set and they make some sort of, I guess they make some sort of comment about it where they're feeling something inside of them. They don't know what it is. And maybe I start bringing up something to do with the biomechanics of that particular exercise, or maybe I start to bring up something relative to them and how hard they push themselves and why they should be pushing themselves. And I'll just put this little seed in them. So maybe they're going to think about next day, next week, next month. And I find that it almost just takes care of itself. It might be a long time. It might be the next work that they come in, they start asking further questions. And that's really where education comes from, is when people start asking the question. And I would love to get someone to ask me a question that I honestly don't know the answer in terms of fitness. But most of the questions are stuff that you've been asked 1,000 times before, are pretty simple. So you're ready to go. So getting them into that mindset where they're going to ask you that question by just giving them those little seeds that you're just planting, I find that that's probably the best way of doing it. And I can't really say that I have a system for it, as opposed to that's just how I had been taught things. And then the other thing I find that works really good is trying to come up with analogies for things. I find that people just seem to be able to get that. And I know I've discussed this on your podcast before, and I'll say it again. I stole Jay Vincent's analogy about losing weight that he said on your podcast originally about it. Losing weight through exercise is like trying to empty a pool with a coffee cup. And I said, yeah, you could do it eventually, but it's inefficient. I have used that probably a couple hundred times since I heard it. I always give him credit. I didn't make it up myself. I stole it from him. But people can visualize that. They can literally see themselves at the side of a pool with a coffee cup and how long it would take him to do it. And so I could probably write a little pamphlet. I probably got 50 to 100 of these analogies that I've used a ton of times. And it puts that vision into people's head so they can see it, as opposed to me explaining well, if you exercise, it's this many calories and, you'd have to do this for this long, and you lose people, but people can see that analogy in their head. So I would say that I lean on analogies. And then the main thing would be I'm constantly planting seeds in people, hoping that they will turn into questions or into further education. Because I do like to say that although I don't have, say, like I know some of our colleagues, they'll do a once a month education course where they have people come in. I think that's great. I just never got on board with doing it myself. But I would like to think that anybody who's trained at my facility for a year should be able to walk into almost any other setting outside of our gym and be the expert on fitness, whether they're with their friends, whether they're with their colleagues, just wherever they go. I would expect anyone who's trained with me for a year to know vastly more on the subject of fitness and exercise science than almost anybody that's going to come into their lives.
Yeah. Love it, Mike. Let's just summarize some of this very quickly, because I know I've been asked for summaries at the end of episodes, and maybe you can help me with this. So I think the first thing is just staying away from the words high intensity training. So ambiguous. You're better off being a bit more precise: strength training, resistance training, something like that. Don't bore the client with the history of Alpha Jones and the history of Med-X, or don't bore the client with anything that's just really extensive on a particular aspect of exercise, right? Unless it's really pertinent to a specific need, or they've pulled that thread, right? Yeah, unless they ask.
Unless they ask, and they're fascinated by it.
Careful of evidence-based. Again, very ambiguous. What do we say about cardio? I have the cardio question here. Can't remember what we said.
You can either explain it or you can get them to feel it.
That's it.
Both methods will work, and you're just playing to your crowd.
Yeah. So you gave a really good analogy on cardio, or not analogy, but a description about how exercise is, or cardiovascular exercise is, what muscle working against resistance, I think is how you put it. And like to that point, saying less, right? Saying less and allowing the workout to answer some of those questions for you. And just realizing again, that if someone's come in the door, if we're talking about a new prospect, if they've come in the door, then that's like 80% of the battle, or the job. And don't be careful of talking too much and talking yourself out of the sale. Realize they're there to be led by you.
If anybody emails you or calls you, I think your main priority should be to get them to walk in the door. I answer very few questions on email. I might give a very quick 1-sentence response to a question, but I always say, come in the door. We can talk more in person. We get a lot more discussed in person than via email. And I'm constantly trying to get them to come in the door, because if you get them in the door, like I said, you've already cleared the biggest hurdle.
Yeah, great point. What a great little point. Practice. You talked about the importance of just, you're going to listen to this podcast and you might think, well, maybe I'm still unsure about how I articulate X, Y, and Z, but just get out and obviously you want to have your knowledge. You want to understand what you're talking about. So you want to go and do your research. You want to go and read the books, read Body by Science, read the new High Intensity Training by Linton Darden, read Bill Day Simone's books, and study HIT Uni and these things. So make sure you've got a baseline knowledge, and then obviously always be learning, right? Continuous learning. I mean, I am so passionate about that, and I'm always challenging my own ideas. I'm always trying to develop my ideas. I know you are too, Mike, and obviously many of the listeners of the show and the guests we've had. But yeah, just if you can't, don't worry about not being able to articulate something perfectly. Just practice and try and talk to clients and get feedback and watch what happens and learn from that. Establish a teaching focus. We talked about that. Whether it's more informal in the way Mike likes to do STG in terms of planting seeds and using analogy, or whether it's an actual system where you want to be able to scale it and repeat it across trainers, like a weekly teaching focus, which I guess you can combine both really. I think it's important to have something in place that you can educate clients over the long term, and be authentic, right? So don't be a robot. Play the music.
People are smart.
Yeah, people will know when you're not being you, and it won't resonate and it won't work as well. and when you're trying to influence people. That's my list. That's my summary, Mike. Have I missed anything there, do you think? I've probably missed a lot.
I think that's a pretty good wrap up. I think the summary might be a good idea too.
Cool. All right. Good stuff. All right. So, Mike, best way for people to find out more about you?
You can Google us, STG Strength and Power. It should come up on any of the social medias. Instagram, I think we're at Mecca of the North. And STG Strength and Power at hotmail.com. It all goes directly to me. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Great stuff. And thank you so much again for joining me. Really appreciate you coming on at short notice. And for everyone listening, to find the blog post for this episode and download free resources to help you grow your strength training business, please go to highintensitybusiness.com, search for episode 322. And until next time, thank you very much for listening.